All right, all you Yinzers, welcome to another episode of the Mad Chad and Eddie Show on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I'm your host, Eddie Provident. With me, as always, is my main man, Mad Chad. With us, I don't even have a superlative for you, man, but writer for S.I Pittsburgh, just knower of all things football. Derrick is back with us, man. How is it going, dude? How's the new gig? Because when we had you on last time, it was you had just found out about this gig, right?
Yeah,
with SI. So how's it going, man?
Yeah, man, it's been fun. My guy Nolan, he been pushing out a ton of content. It's been fun, kind of working beside him. So it's been a cool thing for sure.
Yeah, following you and just getting to read your stuff and like catch your analysis and everything, man, and kind of see you. I guess I don't want to say blossom because we knew what you were already, but just for other people to finally get to hear your stuff and get to see what you're about and get your knowledge, man. It's been really cool to see that and to see that grow. So we're excited for you, man, and we're excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, appreciate you guys having me on again, man. It's always fun to come chop it up.
Yep, for sure.
Well, I wanted to start off because, and listen, we're going to start with a lot of positives because Eddie and I have had so many weeks on this show where we had to discuss the losses and the offensive line. So I want to start with some positives, and I wanted to ask you. I saw your Twitter thread today. It was really interesting to me about two players in particular, Terrell Edmunds and Devin Bush, and I think objectively we can all agree that both those players are solid players. Would that be a good word to use for those for you guys?
I think so.
Yeah, I would say
solid, right? Okay. So I guess there's some misconception about Devin Bush in particular because both these guys were drafted in the first round. So I guess that just the expectations of a first round pick go, especially Devin Bush. I mean, he was drafted 10th overall. My expectations for a linebacker that's drafted 10th overall is not only to be a solid player, but to be a game changer. I considered Ryan Shazier a game-changing player. And I was sold whenever they were drafting Devin Bush that that's what he was. And maybe he's not, and that doesn't mean that he's a bad player. Like I said, I do agree that he's solid, but doesn't the context of him being a 10th round pick and the Steelers trading up to get him, doesn't that context have to be a part of his evaluation process?
Yeah, he's going through the same thing that Edmunds has been going through, right? Like everybody kind of put this label that Edmunds was kind of bad based off like kind of a rookie season where he was thrown in and not ready. And then he's struggled to kind of get away from that narrative that the fan base has kind of put on him. You look at Edmunds right now, Edmunds has been the Steelers' best player in the secondary. And like, if it wasn't for like a couple of people that have a good platform on Twitter, like half the fan base probably wouldn't even know or acknowledge that. But he's been their best player in the secondary, I feel like, this year. And then as far as Devin, man, like Devin's coming off a major injury, and I think he's playing right now a tick slow. But the thing with Devin is like those expectations that come with trading up into the top 10 to get a guy like that. It's going to be hard for them to win that trade unless he's just this star linebacker from day one, both against the run and in coverage. And that's just not like Bush had a really limited coverage like profile coming out of Michigan. Like they didn't ask him to do a whole lot. They asked him to run sideline to sideline, and that's what he was,
right,
as a run stopping defender.
Mm-hmm.
But like, and he can do that here too. And I also think another thing that's besides him playing, he's a tick slow right now to react. I feel like in the run game, there's too often times where like he gets himself a little bit out of position and is just slow to react off of that. Whether it's being in the wrong gap or be like struggling to read like a play fake or something like that. But I also think for him, it's something nobody's really putting two and two together here is like he's playing in like behind not Tyson Alualu, Stephon Tuitt anymore. Like we're seeing like Isaiah Buggs and Isaiah Loudermilk and, guys like that. And like there's a big difference when those guys are in there because those linemen are able to get to the second level and get their hands on him, and that's where he struggles. He's not a big dude. So when linemen are getting up to the second level and getting their hands on him, he's going to struggle.
So now I think we can, from what we're hearing inside the Steelers, I think that it sounds like Stephon Tuitt is going to be back probably sooner rather than later. And
Thank God.
obviously with the situation with his brother and everything, he's dealing with injuries and everything. Like, I wouldn't rush him back. This is not me trying to say that he needs to come back right away. Like, I mean, I get it, man. That stuff comes first, and you got family issues, you got to deal with that, and we don't. I think it's something, the mental health side of sports is something that's ignored a lot of the time. So I don't want to be insensitive to that by any stretch of the imagination. But looking at it strictly from a football standpoint, having a guy like Stephon Tuitt in the lineup is obviously going to help this football team. So getting him back, I think, to your point about the defensive line with Devin Bush, is really going to help Bush a lot. I think it's also going to help Schobert too. Because I think we've seen Schobert get exposed a little bit. I think both of those inside linebackers have had times where they've both been exposed.
They were getting gashed last night.
Yeah, particularly in the run. Yeah, when Seattle made that adjustment going into the second half to run away from Cam Heyward, we really saw the weakness of this defense when it comes to the interior defensive lineman when it's not Cam Heyward. If they're I think Loudermilk as a rookie I think he's doing fine. I think Buggs is doing fine as a backup, as a replacement. I think Wormley is doing.
Yeah, Wormley's been all right.
He's been pretty good, but like you said, they're not Stephon Tuitt. They're not Tyson Alualu. And so, to your point, man, I think that defensive line is getting exposed a bit. And because they're getting exposed, Bush and Schobert and even Spillane, when he comes in, are getting exposed to a degree too. And I think it shows the importance of that solid front.
And there's also something to be said too. Like, if you do go back and look at the splits for teams running the ball on the Steelers with Cam Heyward on the field and with him off the field, they're drastically different. Through the first 6 weeks. So, like, how big of a difference Cam is, like, when he's on the field and when he's able to be an impact. But, like, I also want to point out against the Seahawks, like, I thought that they did exactly what the Steelers wanted them to do in a way, but it eventually got to a point where it was just the floodgates were open. Like, the Steelers were playing a lot of too high safeties to try to take away Metcalf and Lockett. And I said last week that I thought the Steelers were going to win that game by at least 7, maybe off a garbage time touchdown. But I thought they were going to be in control
of the
game unless Metcalf or Lockett broke a deep one, because I just didn't think Geno Smith was going to be capable of moving the football. And with that being said, like, putting Edmonds and removing him from that box count and putting him back deep with Minka to prevent those big plays, there is a consequence with that, and that leaves you with a lighter box. And the Seahawks just took advantage of it. They won the line of scrimmage, and then they started to really gash them in the second half. Credit to Shane Waldron and Pete Carroll for not panicking. Getting down 14, they could have easily abandoned the run coming out of the half, and they just didn't do it. So credit to them.
Well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to get more into the coaching side, Derek, because I thought it took the Steelers defense and Keith Butler specifically, I think it took them a little too long to make that change and make that adjustment. So we're going to take a break. When we come back, more with Derrick Bell and Chad Nolan and myself. This is the Mad Chad and Eddie Show. The Mad Chad and Eddie Show on DK Pittsburgh Sports. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the Mad Chad and Eddie Show on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. As always, I am your host, Eddie Provident. With me is my co-host, Mad Chad Nolan, and back for a second segment, probably going to stick around with us for the whole show, is our man Derrick Bell from S.I. Pittsburgh. Derrick, so before the break, we started talking about coaching a little bit and how Pete Carroll and his team, his coaching staff didn't panic going down 14-0 early. They didn't abandon the run. Why do you think it took Keith Butler and the Steelers' defensive staff so long to make the adjustment that was pretty obvious, I thought? I mean, I think everybody that was watching that game started to pick up that, they're running away from Cam Heyward, and it's working. And the safeties are back, like you said. And we're it's working, and the Steelers are missing tackles. And why do you think they stuck with what wasn't working as long as they did? Because I think if they make that adjustment after that first drive, I don't think it ever gets to be, a 20-20 game or a 17-17 game. I think they are able to make the necessary adjustments to stop it, but they didn't.
Yeah, I think it just, man, I really think that Metcalf was the main reason why. I think they were absolutely terrified. Because here's the thing, too, like Seattle, so they don't rotate their receivers. Like the Steelers, they'll flip the receivers and everything else. Seattle plays Metcalf on the left-hand side, Lockett on the right side. And what that does is, like, when the Steelers, go nickel, that puts James Pierre out there. And you saw with a guy – and Pierre has played okay at times, but he's just very inexperienced. And that's the thing with Metcalf is, like, you don't have any room for error with him, because if you do lose a rep at the line of scrimmage and you have a bad jam or you're late to flip your hips or anything like that, it's over, because he's already 5 yards past you and the ball's in the air, and like there's so much separation that he's going to score. So I just think that they did everything they could to limit those opportunities for Seattle to take a shot. And the other thing with that is I do agree that they probably could have came off of that or maybe mixed it up a little bit more as the game went on. But the tackling was the biggest issue for the Steelers, I think.
Oh, atrocious!
I mean,
atrocious.
There was multiple plays that, like, you look at that Travis Homer 27-yard play that they had in the second half, unacceptable. You got three Steelers that are able to wrap him up right well before the first down, and the dude gets 27 yards. I mean, this is the third or fourth string player that we're talking about that's running through half your defense. I mean, that the execution aspect of the Steelers' defense, to me, in the second half was the biggest issue from a tackling perspective.
Well, and one guy that I noticed, and I've been picking on him a lot, and Eddie and I talked about him last week, is Minka. And, I got killed last week because I said, hey, it's been like 12 games since Minka's like made a significant impact on the defense. And, for a while there, I was like, well, the teams are probably just avoiding him. And that may be so. I know you watch the All-22 a lot. That may be so. But I still just, like, when I see him out there, I don't see him playing well. What are you seeing with that? Do you agree with me, or?
I'll say I don't understand why, but, like, it's something weird with this. I feel like the fan base and just some of the media too, like, if you're a really good defensive player, if you play on defense, you have a little bit more of a leash than you do if you play on offense. I know, like, quarterback aside, who's always going to take the most, like, crazy stuff, but I'll say Minka hasn't been bad, but Minka's not playing well right now. And the reason why is because he's been directly involved in way too many either big plays or should be big plays. Like, you can even go back to week 1. I mean, he was beat by a double move that kind of Terrell Edmonds kind of saved him on, honestly. That should have been a touchdown. He was directly responsible for the Henry Ruggs dagger the next week. Even last week, you look at Javonte Williams, that run that it's a difficult play to come up in the alley like that against Javonte Williams, who's a really good player. But again, you miss the tackle and he goes for 49 yards. Luckily, they give him that stupid penalty and they don't even score there, thanks to a saving tackle from James Pierre at the 1 yard line that kind of went underrated. But I just think the thing about the turnovers for Minka, like, you can say what you want. Like, great safeties have that knack, almost like a magnet, where the ball just kind of magically finds them. But some of those plays that he makes, like, there's an element of luck to it, and then there's an element of, like, teams avoiding him, which teams do avoid him. So, like, that's why I personally don't really go after, like, a safety like that plays a lot of deep safety for not making plays. Granted, he has dropped 2 interceptions this year. He dropped one from Burrow that actually ended up being an interception for Edmonds, and then he dropped one for Rodgers the next week.
Yeah.
But I do think that, like, he could definitely play better. And that's I think the saving grace, right? Like, if you're looking for a silver lining about this Steelers defense, they're playing solid, but they're not playing great up to expectations. And I think if you can get Minka back to where he's played at that all-pro level the past 2 years, you're cooking.
Well, you nailed it, though, because again, maybe it's just because my expectations are so much higher for Minka. When I like a player, I tend to actually expect, like you and I are both Ben fans, so like I would always expect Ben to do more than other people would expect him to do. And then you also, at the same time, look at number 90, who I want to talk to you guys about this because I'm starting to get like to the TJ Watt point where he's starting to be like prime James Harrison and prime Troy Polamalu, where he's making that big of impact and literally going out there in these games and crucial situations and just saying, you know, F it, I'm going to do whatever I can to win this game. That's stuff that I haven't seen from a defensive player since Troy and James Harrison. And that's why I'm like Devin Bush, Minka, those two guys in particular, I think they were brought in to be that impact player. And I'm not seeing it from those guys, but I am seeing it from TJ.
I think the big thing for me with TJ is if you look at his game on Sunday, first half, it wasn't that he was playing bad, but he didn't really do anything of note in the first half. He had a couple of pass deflections. You know, it was a solid game, but it wasn't that TJ Watt like spectacular game that we've all been looking for, right? And even if you take the Green Bay game, he had 2 sacks, but the one sack he tripped Rodgers, and the second sack Rodgers just went down. So, you know, like, yeah, they count on the stat sheet as sacks, but it wasn't that TJ Watt game.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden, when the Steelers need TJ Watt the most, he finds a way to raise his level of play in overtime and make the 2 biggest plays of the game that handed the Steelers the win. Literally, he handed them.
Like I said, I haven't seen that since Troy. And
the offense wasn't going to do it. They proved it the other night that they weren't going to be the ones to win that game. The rest of the defense couldn't tackle if their lives depended on it. Save Cam Heyward and
Cam played great,
and Trey
Norwood played great too. Yeah.
But when the Steelers needed TJ Watt to do something, when they needed him to be that $100 million player, whatever, you know, that big time star. He shows up, and he shows up in a big way, forces a turnover that wins the game for the Steelers. And to your point, Chad, that is the type of thing that we were so used to with James Harrison. And Troy. We were so used to with Troy Polamalu, right? And now he's in Joey Porter when Joey Porter was in his prime. And he's doing those types of things that those types of players did for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And boy, is it fun to watch.
Yeah. I mean, you're seeing – like, TJ Watt, I mean, there's no doubt. For one, if you were one of those people that was complaining about his contract, man, y'all probably feel really stupid about it. No, I mean, Troy's on a Hall of Fame trajectory. I mean, he's an absolutely special player. I mean, he really, as great of a franchise as the Pittsburgh Steelers are, and how many great defensive players have come through here, TJ's going to end up sitting somewhere near the top of that list, which is incredible to even think about this.
Hey, especially if he stays on this
Let me ask you, just on the eye test alone, and Derek, you can go first. James Harrison in his prime versus TJ right now, and take the playoff side because TJ really hasn't had that chance to go, but just like, do you think TJ's already better or is going to be better?
Go ahead, Derek, you first.
The thing for me, and this is kind of, I won't get into like the long, lengthy rant about
right.
What I thought you both mentioned a good point about like TJ and making those plays and when he made them, right? 2 overtime sacks, one of them which kills the first drive, and then the forced fumble that literally wins the game. We talked about Ben. How many times have we seen Ben have a terrible first half and then come back, and when the game's on the line,
that Jacksonville game from a few years ago comes to mind. Yeah.
And that's the thing, like when you have those Hall of Fame type elite, just special players, like you don't care what happens at any point during the game. When the game's on the line, you trust them to go win it. And that's what TJ's doing right now. But as far as like comparing him to Harrison, I'll say the same thing as like other guys from these past couple years that we've had. Like, to me, there's a different type of stage when you get into the playoffs that you got to do it on before I'm ready to go there. But I do think TJ will get there.
Yeah, for me, I think it's unfair to compare the two. And I know this is going to sound like a cop-out, but they're 2 very different edge rushers. James Harrison was a leverage guy that was going to bull rush you and absolutely tear you apart, bowl you over, and get to the quarterback that way. TJ's more of a speed rusher. He's more of a, he's got a move or two where he's going to put it on you. I can't remember who it was, but he made a move a couple of weeks ago and got past the tackle. And I mean, like the dude, he left the tackle just like grasping at air. It was, I wish I remember which one it was, but dude, it was hilarious to watch it happen. And that's the kind of guy that TJ is. So I think they are very different players, even though they play the same position. So from that standpoint, I don't know that it's fair to say, because he's a better speed rusher, he's a better move guy, but he's not the leverage and power guy that James Harrison was. So different types of players. For me, though, with TJ Watt, you talked about the playoffs. I know he hasn't had a lot of chances to do a lot in the playoffs, but the chances that he's had so far, he hasn't really raised his game to that level in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that he won't. And like that, we can say that whole Steelers team decided that they just weren't going to show up for the Browns game in the wild card round last year. So I'm not going to sit here and say it's all TJ Watt's fault, because it's not. But I want to see him in the playoffs more than the one or two times he's been there, so that we can see what he can do and what, let him spread his wings a bit and get more opportunities to play in the playoffs and in big games.
And I think that's part about being a Steeler, right? Like when you're a Steelers fan or when you cover the Steelers, like we don't reminisce a ton, about regular season games. You talk about about the best players that have ever played here, and you're talking about, Troy's pick six to send him to a Super Bowl. You're talking about Ben going, the length of the field to win a Super Bowl. You're talking
Harrison's interception,
pick six in the Super Bowl. Like the legendary players here all had that, even if it's not consistent success or, because the playoffs, you're working with such a small sample size and there's so many variables to where you might not be able to get in that moment. But you look at most of the great players here that have ever played here, like they have those signature moments in the playoffs where you can look at and say, like, that's where he puts his stamp on the franchise. TJ's still kind of waiting for that moment. You can look at a guy like Cam Heyward who's still waiting on that moment. So,
dude. So last night, Ryan Clark said that he thinks Heyward should be like at the end of his career considered for the Hall of Fame. Now I'm looking at his 4-time Pro Bowls, 2-time All-Pros. I think if he keeps playing the way he is this year, he should get a 3 All-Pro. I don't know, man. 5 Pro Bowls and 3 All-Pros. If he has that might start getting him closer. I think Cam Heyward might be the most underrated defensive player of his era. I don't think that's hyperbolic to say that.
I mean, Cam's phenomenal.
And I was wrong about Cam Heyward. When he came out, I was like, nah, he's terrible. And I remember he flamed me on Twitter. He flamed me. He was like, I'll show you, and he has.
Yeah. The only thing for Cam, I do think that the last couple of years he's kind of transformed into that dominant player. And he's still playing at a high level, like you said, to where he could end up, notching another All-Pro or two, and then we're having a different discussion. I don't think that I like his odds right now for the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, right now, yeah.
But I will say that, he's definitely helped his odds over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
But again, it's kind of like the same thing with TJ, right? Like, to me, those moments, man, in prime time and in the playoffs where you just got a lot more eyes watching you, those carry a lot of weight in the mind of voters. So you've got to, and Cam, he's, been in a handful, half dozen playoff games, really hasn't done anything. And again, not trying to say, we're looking at small sample sizes. There's a lot of variables, but I think, if the Steelers somehow, say they get to like a wild card game or something like that, and he goes off for like 2.5 sacks or has one of them games where he's just flat out unblockable, you get, several million people watching you during that. And then that changes.
And then it changes the narrative fast. Yeah. Well, Derek, let's take one more break, and then when we come back, speaking of Hall of Famers, we've got a Hall of Famer leading the offense, and I want to talk about his play so far. I want to talk about that offensive line. I want to talk about Najee, Chase Claypool. We got a lot to talk about on the offensive side of the football. So when we come back, we'll tackle the offensive side of the ball, something that the Steelers defense couldn't do. But this is the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. You're listening to Mad Chad and Eddie Show. We'll be right back after this. All right, welcome back to the Mad Chad and Eddie Show on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I'm your host, Eddie Provident. With me, as always, Mad Chad Nolan. And with us for a third segment to talk Steelers football is Derrick Bell of S.I. Pittsburgh. Derrick, we talked about the defensive side of the football for pretty much the whole first two segments. When we saw the Steelers play against Denver, I thought the offense did a lot of things good. I thought they did a lot of things that were there to build off of. And it looked like, in that second quarter, it looked like we were going to see them build some more. And then it just kind of, the bottom fell out. And now I don't know how much you attribute that to the defense losing some momentum. I don't know how much you attribute that to, Chase Claypool just wasn't good and he stifled a few drives pretty much on his own. Inexperience on the offensive line. I don't know what you attribute what happened with the offense to, but it almost looked like they just, all of the momentum that they made just kind of came to a grinding halt. What was your take Sunday night with the Steelers offense?
Yeah, I mean, I think what they were trying to do was kind of replicate that rushing success that they had against Denver. The difference being, though, that Seattle wasn't giving them as light of a box. I mean, Denver plays that quarters Fangio system where they like having two deep safeties and you consistently get 6-man box counts. Not that the Steelers didn't run the ball well just from an execution standpoint, but they had the numbers game. And they didn't really have it Sunday night. And I thought Canada was, in my opinion, a little stubborn with some of the first-round runs. Now, as the game wore on, they started kind of working a little bit. Najee busted off several runs in the fourth quarter that I thought were really impressive on first down, so credit to that. But, man, I thought the same thing as you guys probably did. I thought when I saw Ben get in that little bit of a rhythm in that second and third quarter, I thought we were about to see some fireworks. And then this offense just has such a – I've talked about it a lot, but this offense just has such a small margin for error and penalties and just stupid stuff like that. The fumble on the RPO, stuff like that. They just don't have the top-end elite talent to overcome it.
Dale and I have talked about this a lot on the Steelers Today shows that we record over on the South Side, that this whole team is built with a very small, thin margin for error.
Absolutely.
The blueprint's there, really good defense. The defense shuts offenses down, makes a couple of big plays, gets a couple of turnovers, and the offense does just enough to, to get by. And we saw how thin that margin, even in a victory, we saw how thin that margin of error is, because there was a point in time where I really thought this game's over. I really thought the way the Steelers defense was tackling, I didn't think that they were going to stop Seattle a second time in overtime. I thought Seattle was going to get down the field, kick the field goal, and win it. Again, we talked about TJ. Thank God for TJ, making the big play, saving the day. But my concern with the offense right now is not I don't think it's the lack of big plays. I don't think it's the lack of that. I think it's the lack of experience on the offensive line, right? And what that is causing, because we're seeing times where Kendrick Green looks like he's going to be one of the best centers in football. We'll see him get to the second level and blow people over. We'll see Dan Moore be an absolute unit at tackle. We'll see Chuks Okorafor shut down Von Miller. But then we'll also see Kendrick Green get blown back to where he's tackling Najee. We'll see Chuks Okorafor look like he's never played football before, and we'll watch Dan Moore play the way he did against Seattle. So I think the inexperience is what's causing all of the issues. The problem is you can't really go through those growing pains because the margin of error is so small.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, with the offensive line, I thought they were fine against Seattle. I did think Moore probably had Moore really struggled. Darrell Taylor's, I thought he was going to be a player coming out of Tennessee. He missed last year with the injury, but man, before he got hurt, he was working more. I mean, he was flat out beating him consistently. So I think that the thing with this offense, man, that just makes it a little difficult is this offensive line is just kind of coming into their own. They're figuring things out as we go, and the biggest difference between this team and say the 2008 Steelers, which I know people are trying to draw these comparisons between the two teams, there's really not one. Like, I guess the thought or the formula may be the same, but the talent level is different. And the biggest reason why is just been like, you're taking an absolute like unicorn in 2008, and then you're looking at a guy right now who's just has some limitations just due to his age. So.
Yeah, so I mean, Eddie and I have talked about this at nauseum, where I think they kind of thought, okay, they looked at the Denver Broncos from 2015 with Peyton Manning. Just do enough and let the defense win the game. Well, two things happened. One, Ben regressed way more than I think he and the Steelers had thought that he was going to regress to. And B, let's be honest, this defense, I think whenever they get everybody back, I think they're a good defense, but I don't consider them like that elite game-changing defense. I think very good is their ceiling.
Yeah, I think what the Steelers wanted to do, honestly, I think they knew what they had in Ben. Like even after like some of the injuries, like late in the season last year, like his knee injury, I think they knew what they had, and I think that their idea was that they were gonna revamp the running game and commit to it and be able.
And they tried.
Yeah. And I think they wanted to take the pressure off of him. I mean, they brought him back on a 1-year, $14 million deal. I mean, that's a very, very low salary for a starting quarterback. I mean, it's not like they brought him back thinking like, oh, Ben's got plenty of years. Like, I don't think they thought he had plenty of years left. But the thing with Ben, man, to me is like what's been very perplexing is Ben's mechanics after that year off have just like really, really regressed. And I mean, they're so inconsistent. And I really think the biggest thing for me that I noticed when I watch him is his lower body mechanics are all over the place. And it really hampers his ability to like consistently strike and stroke the football.
Let me ask you this, Derek, on that point. That's a really good point about Ben. Ben was never a mechanics guy. Right, like we never, we hear Brady and we hear, Marino. We hear all these greats talk about their mechanics and how important it is to throw the ball. This is the first year I've ever heard Ben Roethlisberger talk about his mechanics. This is the first year I've ever heard Ben Roethlisberger talk about his workout routines and what he's doing off the field. Do you think that because Father Time has caught up with him, now he's trying to rebuild his mechanics? Because he can't just sling it like he used to.
Yeah.
He's incapable of it, So now he has to worry about what his base is. And he has to worry about how far apart his legs are. He has to worry about driving through the football and not just letting it sling with, not slinging it with his arm. He even talked about it earlier this year in one of his interviews or one of his Wednesday press conferences. He talked about, if you're throwing with your arm, you're doing it wrong. Like, so he's now even acknowledging that. So my thought is that he just never had to worry about it. Now he has to, and it's in his head too much.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you do something and you're that good at something, it just kind of comes naturally. But I think genuinely, I really do think that year off, because Ben had good mechanics, even though he was never like, I mean, he was never the guy that's going to sit there and break everything down for you. Like,
right.
I remember Chris Sims did an interview with him like in like 2018, and like, even looking back at then, like he's asking about Ben's like workout routine and how he like throws the ball. Like, I don't even know.
He's like perplexed because it's all perfect.
Yeah.
And
but that's the thing, like when you're that gifted, and then some of your gifts, like your mobility and your lower body flexibility, kind of get taken away from you, then you do. And I think some of the things for Ben, like I've seen him do it multiple times, where he's actually looking like he's overcompensating, where he's overstriding, or he's trying to make throws where he's not completely set, or his shoulders remains open, or, things like that. So it's frustrating to me, because I think when you do see him, when everything does look right from top to bottom, he can still really sling the football. And that's the perplexing thing for me, is like why it takes him so long to get in a rhythm where he feels like he can do that on a consistent basis.
When I was at training camp, and I've said this a few times on the show, it was never his arm that worried me. Like watching him throw the football in training camp. I mean, he was slinging the ball 55, 60 yards, and he wasn't having a hard time doing it. He was going through the drills, the long toss drills, where you don't use your lower body at all. And he was throwing the ball 40, 45 yards with no lower body. I wasn't worried about his arm. What I was worried about is when he would roll out, he looked like me running.
James,
like it was bad, and it was scary. Like those knees and the all the injuries he's taken to the lower body, they're finally taking their toll, and I think that is all part of the reason why that he had to. And then you factor in an elbow injury on top of all of that, man. I don't think people realize how important mechanics are to your elbow, the health of your elbow. Why do you think all these pitchers get Tommy John surgery? Because their mechanics aren't good, and they're tearing up those ligaments in their elbow. So he's coming off elbow surgery, and he's older with bad knees. Man, mechanics have to be pristine, or you're going to be in trouble.
His throwing motion is completely different now than it was.
Yeah,
before.
Yeah,
it's very different. And like you talk about like the lower body, like your lower body, your legs and your hips are really where you generate, like where if you look,
that's where you generate your power.
Like that's where you generate the velocity. It's not just solely about your arm. The arm is more about like the off platform stuff, the times where you can't really set your feet or you can't really get your body
right
towards your target. Ben's issue like right now is like, you can just tell he's not generating any power or velocity from his lower half.
Exactly. And not that I ever was on a high level, because I didn't even play in college, but I pitched for 10 years, and, pitching coaches would have us doing leg drills. It was never arm drills. It was always leg drills, because that's where we generated the power from, and so where it comes to arms, it's flexibility, it's arm slot, it's angles, it's all that kind of stuff, so that you keep those ligaments and those tendons healthy. And yeah, you're right, man. Like, it's completely different than it. Just all you got to do is 2 years ago, Ben, at the beginning of the season before he hurt his elbow, to now, and watch film on how he threw 2 years ago before the elbow injury, how he's throwing now. It's completely different. You're absolutely right, D.
Think about this though. If we're frustrated watching him be like, whenever he makes that, he made a nice throw to Deontay 2 weeks in a row. He made a nice throw to Deontay, and it's like, oh, there we go. That's the Ben. And then you can see him, like, there'll be a play where he'll try to scramble, right? He'll try to scramble, and you can just see his face, like, he's in shock that he can't. His mind wants to do what his body used to do, and his body is like, nah, bro, this ain't happening no more. So, if it's frustrating for us to watch, I can just imagine that. At the same time, if I'm being objective, a lot of this is, he probably should be held accountable because, A, he didn't diet the way that a pro athlete probably should. He didn't do a lot of the things that a Brady did. To me, Ben's always been my generation's Brett Favre, where he was just like, hey, I got this natural ability and I'm just going to let it go until it's not there anymore. And I think with Ben, just like with Favre, it's pretty much not there anymore.
Yeah.
One more.
That's the thing too. Like you can tell, like when he starts to get in that rhythm, like because like you saw it too on Sunday night. Like for one, that throw that honey hole shot against cover 2 to Deontay, that throw was a dime. I mean, and like then I think he took he hit one more throw like right after that. That was like in stride, in rhythm. That the ball was like really flying out of his hands, and then the very next play, he immediately like flushes a little bit out of like a pretty clean pocket. And I really feel like in his mind, he's like, okay, I'm about to get the fire symbol. I'm feeling really good about myself. And then like, I do think that there's been times like, that the fumble against Denver, like even 5 years ago, Ben rolls out there, like has no problem. And he even checked, like if you watch from the behind the end zone angle, he actually does check behind him to see if anybody's there. And there wasn't anybody. So I think like he just legitimately sometimes forgets that like
can't do that anymore. Yeah,
and like it's very difficult for an athlete like that. That's always been described by like his teammates as hyper competitive. It's hard to accept that reality that your physical gifts just aren't what they were anymore.
Well, Derrick, we've got a couple more minutes left, and before, as much as I know we can go on this Ben topic, especially you two, we can do this forever, but we have a couple more minutes, and I do want to talk about Najee Harris with you. I got a text message here from from the head coach of our high school football team that I coach with, and he was talking about ways to use Najee. Basically, he said that they've got to stop using him, kind of side to side how they've been, and they need to just start putting him, even if it means getting in the pistol, just getting him going forward and moving downhill, because that's going to make people come into the center of, back into that box. It's going to open up the field. I love everything about Najee Harris, and I know that I'm the one that's on record of being, they needed to draft an offensive lineman, they needed to go tackle, but I love everything about this kid, man. There is nothing on the field or off the field that you can hate about Najee Harris. Watching film, what is it that you see about Najee Harris that makes him so special, aside from the physical gifts? The 6'2", 230, runs a 4.4, is an absolute, physical specimen. What is it that you see on film from Najee, maybe vision or, things that he's doing that is making him harder to play against for defenses?
What I really liked about Najee when he was coming out, and I said the same thing that you're really kind of saying too. Like, I knew as soon as this kid became a Pittsburgh Steeler, like going through the draft process, he was running back one for me. I knew if he came here, everybody was going to love him, just because like his personality, the way he plays football is right up the alley for this fan base. What I appreciate the most about Najee is you can run gap with him, you can run zone, you can run wide zone, you can run inside zone, whatever you want to run. You can run power, like you can run with this kid. And that's and then the other aspect of that is what he can do as a receiver. You can put him in the slot. The thing that I kind of want to see them do a little bit more is the run game hasn't been as consistent, but it's much better over the past 3 weeks. I want to see them continue to build on that. The only things that I think from a Najee perspective that he kind of has still some learning to do. There's usually one run a week that he tries to bounce outside that he just doesn't have the same speed for, because the SEC is different than the NFL.
Right.
And he, once or twice a week, has had some bad ID plays and pass protection. But aside from that, I mean, just fantastic. I mean, I think his vision's been much, much better over the past couple of weeks. I didn't even see him miss a single hole, I don't think, last week.
You brought up pass pro. There was a play against Seattle where you got to see him help out. I want to say he was helping out Dan Moore, where there was someone at a clear line at Ben, and Najee was able to chip him and was able to stop him from, and Ben stepped up in the pocket and made the throw. So getting to see him develop in pass pro is pretty fun to watch. I mean, I think it's an underrated part of it. Will be an underrated part of his game as he continues to develop there, because we're seeing strides already. But like you said, there's still some things he needs to clean up.
I think I tweeted this like yesterday, the day before. Najee's work as a runner right now, I have zero questions about. Once the offensive line comes together and they really invest,
it's gonna be dangerous, man.
It's a matter of time. He's gonna be one of the best runners in the league. And then I think like he has natural hands. Like that was something that he played at Alabama. He has natural hands. He understands how to run routes. A lot of running backs can have good hands, but they don't know how to run routes. Like he knows how to manipulate linebackers and how to take advantage of leverage. Like he understands that stuff. So the pass protection is like kind of the last piece to that equation. I tweeted it the other day. I think we should just hook him up on some Lev Bell film, because as great as Le'Veon was, like as a runner, as a receiver, Le'Veon's best asset was his pass protection. I've never seen a running back that made those strides and was as good in pass protection as Le'Veon was. He was fantastic at identifying blitzes, at taking on blockers, winning at the point of attack. Like he was fantastic. So if Najee gets there, man, we got one of the best backs in football, period.
Mm-hmm. You got anything to add, Chad?
No, I mean, last week we talked a lot about Najee. I mean, I'm even talking more about off the field. Like I was watching him talk. I could listen to him talk forever. His personality is contagious. And I think once Ben's gone, I think he might end up taking over as the leader of that offense. I think he's that personable. I think he's that, strong of a personality and character. And I think, like I said last week, I really think that he's about to change the culture of the Steelers philosophically on the field, but also, in the locker room and off the field.
Yeah, I agree with that, man. I agree for sure. Well, that about wraps it up for us on the Mad Chad and Eddie show for tonight. Derrick, we really appreciate you
Woo!
on.
There's a lot of football talk.
Derrick, where can people find all your stuff, man? Where can they follow you? Give your little shout out, man.
Y'all can hit me on my Twitter handle if y'all don't already follow. Y'all should be following, the podcast if you're following me as it is, because we chop it up a lot on there. But my Twitter handle is @Steelers_DB. Y'all can find all my stuff on there. Just whatever you do, don't hit the notifications because I'll probably.
But, yeah, man, it's been fun talking. Like Chad said, a lot of Steeler talk. Shout out to my main man, Jameson, in the background there, man. I think he's definitely wanting to hang out with Pops. So we're gonna let Dad Chad go ahead and be Dad Chad. For Mad Chad Nolan, for Derrick Bell, I am Eddie Provident. Thank you for listening, watching, however you're consuming the Mad Chad and Eddie show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out all the other shows on the network. We will catch you next week with another episode of the Mad Chad and Eddie Show.